Shabbat Shalom, everyone. This is the 25th or the 24th of the first month, depending on your reckoning. It is our fourth Sabbath, Shabbat, third or fourth. I don't want to misquote that. I apologize. I've been reading the Psalms of the Sabbath sacrifices as well, so I should know that, but it's escaped me at the moment. Anyways, it's Tob to be with everyone, and we are continuing in our reading of Fourth Ezra or Second Esdras, chapter 15, where we had just finished with Ezra inquiring of Yahuwah about being endowed with the Ruach to make a copy of the writings for the people because he was going to be taken to paradise. And instead of doing that, he endows him with the Ruach and also 5 scribes so that Ezra dictates to the others and the others write. And they wrote a series of books, 24 of which were published openly for the worthy and the unworthy. And then the others were, the last 70 were kept hidden. And it was only for the intelligent among the people. Now we are on chapter 15, and it's speaking of the last Yamim, or last days. It says, Behold, speak you in the ears of my people the words of foretelling, which I will put in your mouth, says Yahuwah, and cause them to be written on paper, for they are trustworthy and true, which our Mashiach is the trustworthy and true one as well, who is the Word. It says, Fear not the imaginations against you. Let not the unbelief of them trouble you that speak against you. For all the unbelievers shall die in their unbelief. Behold, says Yahuwah, I will bring evil plagues upon the world, the sword, famine, death, and destruction. And this is something that you can see play out a great deal in those Antichrist or Anti-Mashiach for Dummies videos, where it's been playing out and foretold in the stars and on earth signs of these things. It says, For injustice or unrighteousness has exceedingly polluted the whole Eretz or earth, and their harmful deeds are fulfilled. Therefore says Yahuwah, I will hold my tongue no more concerning their wicked, chesedless deeds, which chesed is loving kindness. So their wicked, unlovingly kind deeds, which they profanely commit. Neither will I tolerate their wicked practices, in which they wickedly exercise themselves. Behold, the innocent and righteous blood cries out to me, and the inner beings of the righteous cry out continually. This is first mentioned in the book of Hanok, in the book of Genesis, when the blood of Abel or Havel is crying out to Yahuwah from the ground. It's also reiterated in the book of Hanok, where he hears him, and it's told why that's happening and for how long, and why there's a difference between his petitioning and the arbitration or judgment that was going to happen, and then the future one at the consummation of the times. So that's given an allusion and explained there. And then you also have in 4th Ezra, I believe we already covered it in chapter 7, what happens to your inner being after death. And then you see an allusion of this in the book of Revelation, where you have the Kodashim are given white robes and told to rest for a little while longer, the ones that are dwelling under the altar, which is the righteous habitation, what Josephus calls the bosom of Abraham in his discourse to the Greeks on Hades, which is an allusion also to our Mashiach's parable, where you had Lazarus or Eleazar and the rich man, and Lazarus was taken to the bosom of Abraham at his death, but the rich man was suffering torments. It says, chapter 15, verse 9, And therefore, says Yahuwah, I will surely avenge them and receive to myself all the innocent blood from among them. Behold, my people is led as a flock to the slaughter. I will not suffer them to dwell any longer in the land of Egypt or Mitzrayim, which is an allusion to Psalm 44, also Yeshayahu 53:7, and then the spiritual or Ruachni Mitzrayim was the land of Yahuda that our Mashiach came to liberate them from the bondage of sin and death. That was the picture of that he was fulfilling in his coming like unto Moshe. It says, "But I will bring them with a mighty hand and a stretched out arm, and will smite Mitzrayim with plagues as before, and will destroy all its lands. Mitzrayim shall mourn, and the foundation of it shall be smitten with the plague and punishment that I, Yahuwah, shall bring upon it. They that till the ground shall mourn, for their seeds shall fail, and their trees shall be ruined by blight and hail, and by a terrible tempest. Woe to the world and them that dwell therein." If this is the same type of woe that we have an allusion to with the three woes in Revelation, it has to do with the diminishing of his image or the truth, and what happens to creation as a direct result to that. That first woe was with Sixtus III and the things that were enforced against believers by him. It says, "For the sword and misery draws near them, and nation shall stand up and fight against nation with swords in their hands. For there shall be sedition and unrest among men, and invading one another. They shall not regard their sovereigns nor princes, and the course of their actions shall stand in their power." Meaning that they'll do what they feel is right because they're strong enough to do it. "A man shall desire to go into a city and shall not be able. For because of their pride, the cities shall be troubled and be in confusion. The houses shall be destroyed, and the people shall be afraid." We might have gone over this last week, I can't remember, but this is all an allusion to what happened after our Mashiach came too. When they preached the truth, those that rejected him eventually had to go through the tribulation of Rome coming into the land and destroying the place in 70 AD, eventually burning the Hekel and destroying the city itself, where one stone was not left upon another, was completely fulfilled, and the entire land was left desolate for a long time. This is, "A man shall have no pity upon his neighbor, but shall destroy their houses with the sword, and spoil their property, because of the lack of bread and because of great tribulation." And the siege of Jerusalem happened during the time where it was a festival. I think it was the Pesach. So you had men from all over that were keeping the feast in the land, in the city at that time, and then the siege, which made them very sparse on their supplies, and there was a great amount of famine and destruction, people doing evil, pillaging one another. It is a very horrible time, but this is an illusion of what he's foretelling right here, both what happened then and what will happen to the disobedient. It says, "Behold, says Yahuwah, I call together all the sovereigns of the earth to reverence and fear me, from the coming of the sun and from the south." So that would be from the north and the south, from the east and the west, "to turn to each other and repay the things that they have done to them, just as they have done this Yom to my chosen people. So will I do also, and will repay into their bosom, says Yahuwah Almighty. My right hand shall not spare the sinners, and my sword shall not cease from them that shed innocent blood upon the Eretz. The fire will go forth from my wrath, and will consume the foundations of the earth, or Eretz, and the sinners like straw that is kindled. Woe to those who sin and do not observe my commandments, says Yahuwah, I will not spare them. Depart, you untrustworthy children, and defile not my set apart place. For I, Yahuwah, know all them that sin against me, and therefore deliver them to death and destruction. For now are the calamities come upon the whole Eretz, or earth, and you shall remain in them. For I, Yahuwah, shall not deliver you, because you have sinned against me. And that just is reiterating he doesn't take bribes, he's not partial. There's the same standard, the plumb line that he set for everyone never changes. We have to love our neighbor as ourselves, we have to love our creator above all things, and then we'll have a proper alignment for how to be in all these situations. It says, for now, I already read that one, I'm sorry. A vision of terrifying warfare. It says, behold, a terrifying sight, and the appearance thereof from the east, where the nations of the dragons of Arabia shall come out with many chariots, and the multitude of them shall be carried as the wind upon Eretz, or earth, that all they which hear them may fear and tremble. Also the Carmanians, which I had mentioned last time, I thought this was talking about Rome, because the wild boar in the animal apocalypse is mentioned as Edom, and he's also called Edom by Jacob in the book of Yobelim, when uh, Jacob is mourning for the death of Leah with his children at the Tower of Abraham. Edom with his children and some hired mercenaries come to attack him, and he makes the quote, Yaakov does, that his brother is like the wild boar rushing into the spear that will slay him. It's the illusion of who that was. So I thought that this was maybe a misspelling, and they meant to say the Kittim or something, but the Carmanians are an actual people as well. And I just recently read about them, and I can't actually place where that was. I'd have to look again, because there's a few different books I'm reading, and it's for variety purposes. I homeschool my boys now too, and we're reading um, a systematical or an analytical systematic history from creation until the modern times, and it was written in the 1800s. But we're doing a tabular history right now. It's just bullet points of what happened from creation all the way through. I think we're in the 13th century now, and the Carmanians might have been mentioned there, or it could have been mentioned in the post captivity names of Israel by William Pascoe Gord. Um, there's also a few other books that I've been reading, and I might have seen it in one of those. I can't remember, so I apologize for that. But they are an actual people. It is, it might be related to who they are, as mentioned here, but I'm still inclined to think that this should say the Kittim, because they come from the north, which the book of Gad, chapter 2, mentions Edom from the north of the sea, which is the Mediterranean. Also speaking of the Kittim. And then again, the wild boar reference. Just moving on. It says, also for the Carmanians from the north, raging in wrath, shall go forth as wild boars of the forest, and with great power shall they come and engage them in battle, and shall waste a portion of the land of the Assyrians. And then shall the dragons, remembering their origin, shall become still stronger, and conspiring together in great power, and turn to pursue them, shall have the upper hand. Then these shall be disorganized and silenced by their power, and shall turn and flee. And from the land of the Assyrians shall the enemy besiege them, and consume some of them. And fear and dread shall come upon their army, and strife among their sovereigns. The ominous storm clouds. Behold, clouds from the east and from the north to the south, and their appearance is very horrible to look upon, full of wrath and storm. They shall smite one another, and shall pour out a heavy tempest upon the Eretz, and their own tempest. And there shall be blood from the sword as high as the horse's belly, and the man's thigh, and the camel's hock, which is also like the bridle of the horses mentioned in, I believe it's Yeshayahu, where he goes to thresh Edom and he gets blood on his raiment, which is also allusion to what's in the book of Gad the seer, chapter 2, where that Edom that he's thrashing is Catholicism in Europe. It mentions Germania, it mentions the Ashkenazi and the Sepharad or the Sephardic area of Spain, and he's angry with all of that area because of what the people have been doing in it. Also, there's one thing I'd like to mention that I just came to mind. In the exhortation, in the community rule of the Dead Sea Scrolls, there is a section that talks about it's an exhortation about what would happen to the people when they be disobedient and what happens when they turn to the truth. It specifically mentions that when they sinned, he caused them to overstep the boundaries that were established by the fathers so that they would come under the curses of the covenant. And if you pay attention to what we've been talking about, where the 12 tribes are literally spread throughout the entire Eretz or earth, in some places they went into the land of the Semites or the Middle East and Asia, which that was their allotted portion. There was nothing wrong with that. But then when they went into like Africa or where they went into Europe, they were going into territories that were allotted to the other sons of Noach and not Shem. And so whenever they took those with the agreement or concord of the indigenous peoples, there was no problem. Like the founders of Troy, they were invited and then they left. But the ones that forced themselves, the ones that the Germans that came in and pillaged the places and took over by force, they did that to some of their own people that were paganized in the lands there. But what they did eventually came under them. And when they took the things by force, they were going beyond the bounds or the landmarks established by the patriarchs. And they were literally coming under the curses that the sons of Noah could put on themselves under. Just like the Canaanites, the all of the Canaanim were going to be rooted out of the land because they broke their word and they were shifting the boundaries. So the same thing with the children, as long as they're in Europe, all of the 12 tribes that were there by force, they're they're under that curse. I can't see any other way around it but that we have to leave. And then the British Isles are not counted as that. If you look at the breakdown of the the allotment of the land, Japheth got up to Gibraltar, or where Spain is at. So the part that Gad took from him, that all those isles of the Mediterranean, that area of Europe, that was Japheth. And then Ham got their allotted portion, Shem got their allotted portion. But as long as the Semites or the people that shouldn't be are taking over lands that were given to others, that they're under the curse. I'm pretty sure that all of our people that are there literally will have to leave at some point. America is not quite that way, just like the British Isles. Those were not. Those were intentionally planted when the Chaldeans in the ancient history of Caledonia. It was a remnant of the sons of Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, a remnant of the people that came out of Mitzrayim that kept what they called the laws of the altar, which was the books of Enoch, the patriarchs' writings, and then like the testaments of the 12 patriarchs. Those writings that they would have got in Mitzrayim, they knew and they actually practiced them. You can see it in what they called the laws of the altar. They didn't have the Torah, but when someone sinned, they had 7 years where they had to show works meet for repentance. And if you look anywhere in any of the instructions or any of the writings about where you find a 7 year penitence, it's what Reuben walked out after he had sinned. That was in the testaments of the 12 patriarchs. So they took that as a pattern for them to follow. And every time any one of their clans sinned, they were cast out for 7 years. And if they showed the works fit for repentance, they were brought back in. But until then, they were cut off. They couldn't enjoy the benefits of being a citizen with equal liberty. And that's the same as being in the assemblies or being cut off from them. There's a type and picture of that. However, the point of talking about them is when they were planted in the place that was foretold to be their land where they were not going to be moved from, that was what we call Scotland in North Britain. And that was allotted to the Caledonians that were righteous. So that wasn't given to Japheth. Moving on, though, we're on verse 37. It says, "And there shall be great fearfulness and trembling upon Eretz, and they that see the wrath shall be sore afraid, and they shall be seized with trembling. And after that, great storm clouds shall be stirred up from the south and from the north, and another part from the west." If you remember, the clouds are like the witnesses, the storm clouds, the driven about by the wind, the waterless ones without shame. These are all different things that are alluded to for character types in Scripture. And to get a full picture of these, all you have to do is look up these words, just type it into a search box and go through it. Or you can look up the Hebrew, find the Strongs, and find every place it's in Scripture, and then read it. Find out what he says about the winds, what he says about the clouds, what these things are supposed to mean. And that's how he speaks to everybody in parables, but to his taught ones, he makes these things known, right? It's the practical application for that. So if you go through scriptures and you find out the different keywords and what they mean, what he's trying to tell us about these things, you're literally not just making stuff up and you don't go beyond what's written. That's how we get comprehension about how he speaks in parables and what these things are foretelling. Because it's not difficult, but you have to be consistent with his words. And then if you look at a great example for how to do that with an internal consistency is with the book of Revelation and how that's interpreted. But you can see the patterns for that in other parts of scripture as well, including the Dead Sea Scrolls. There's one they call the divination text, and it has a list of the zodiac signs in Aramaic. They say it's the oldest known recording of the zodiac signs. And then it has the a list of when the moon is in each sign going through a month. It supposedly goes throughout a cycle until it repeats itself. I haven't actually written that out, or I don't know, but it's only in fragments. But then another part of that talks about what happens if there's thunder or a lightning or a sound or booming or some type of thing in different parts of the Shamayim where the luminaries are at that time and what that for portends. That might seem a little weird, but they literally had a system in place in the land where if they saw lightning or they heard a thunder crash and it was in a certain constellation, they would know what was going to happen. And if you're familiar with the dummies videos, that's like exactly what you see on a larger scale for the world in the book of Revelation and how that plays out. So it's literally little scale, larger scale in that way too. And the more you see those, the more you see how it reflects the truth and it fits these same patterns. The truth never changes and it will always be. There's never a time where it's not actually true. But to continue here, he says, "And strong winds shall arise from the east and shall prevail over the great storm cloud, which I raised in my wrath, and shall dispel it. And the tempest to cause great fear and destruction, and shall be driven violently toward the south and west. In the not the apostolic constitutions, I apologize. In the ancient history of Caledonia, when Kadoshi or Saint MacIsaac is giving his foretelling on his deathbed about the Dark Ages, the rise of the papacy, and the different things going on there, he specifically mentions the time where two eminent preachers, brothers, would be born of a woman that died and came back to life, which literally happened in the birth of Ebenezer and Ralph Ernskine. Their mother had died, came back to life before she had had them. And that's a story that was known. And actually, I looked that up when I found that. But they were eminent preachers at a time where the cloud of Elohim's wrath had passed over his children, and they became eminent preachers during the time of the one of the great revival areas in the 1700s in Scotland. They were actually part of the schism that broke away from the errors that were in the assembly at the time. That just shows you the allusion to clouds and wrath. It's not something that's just in these words, but it's actual in writings in history that you can see where these things are fulfilled and alluded to. This is something else you can see from Revelation as well, where the actual literal words in the Greek are foretelling things that would be spoken and used later on, both with the voices, which happen to be the word for the lollards or the mumbling, is what that meant in the German, but it was really an insult in Latin. The Latin word for the tares sounded a lot like the word for babbling in English, and these were the babblers, or the ones that came with the voices bringing the word, and it was the seven that followed Wycliffe after he had made his translation, and they were known collectively as the Lollards because of that. Also, you have the founding of America, the rivers that's mentioned over and over that the woman was taken to be by is Patamos, which is very, very similar to the Potomac. And then you have the other words for the son of perdition being very similar to Apollyon. And again, over and over, you can find these connections where you have the literal fulfillment in history, the roundheads again in the round 12 stars, the insult that was used for them, and then the actual fulfillment, the same picture there. So you can see that in different ways here too, in the great storm cloud and the cloud of his wrath being passed over at that time is the same picture. And when his wrath goes away, the truth returns. So when he had his wrath turned before, just like when you had the children coming out of captivity, they got the word again. When Abraham repented and he prayed for deliverance from the evil Ruach oath, he was given the words or the truth that was revealed to men. So there's another connection in the same picture here. Father willing, Abba willing, we can see that. But we'll go ahead and continue now. This is, and shall prevail over the great storm cloud, which I raised in my wrath, and shall dispel it, and the tempest to cause great fear and destruction, and shall be driven violently toward the south and west. And great and mighty clouds, full of wrath and tempest, shall rise up to destroy the inhabitants of the Eretz, and make all the Eretz afraid. And they shall pour out over every high and lofty place a horrible tempest, fire and hail and flying swords and floods of water, that all the fields and all the streams may be filled with the abundance of those waters. And they shall destroy the cities and walls, mountains and hills, trees of the wood and grass of the meadows, and their corn. And they shall go steadfastly to Babylon, and shall destroy her. If you remember the history, the children were taken into captivity in around 721, started 745 to 721 BC, and within about 120 20 years or so, around the 600 BC, was when the Scythians, they rose up to overrun Asia again. They helped the Persians fight against the Babylonians and fight against the Assyrians and overthrow both of them and to become their own empire. They also fought against the Persians later on as well. But it was the children, the 12 tribes that administer his arbitration or judgment on the earth. And it mentions that there will be his battle axe and his hammer from which he smashes the nations. And that's something that you can see again and again, where both whether they're wicked or righteous, they're doing his will and administering his righteous arbitration, or what we call his right ruling and justice. When they're not walking correctly, they suffer as well, however. When they are walking correctly, they don't. And you can see that most easily in the book of Yahushua. When they were obedient, they had no loss of life. The Maccabees the same. When they were doing evil, there was calamity and problems amongst the people. And the same is true throughout history. Whenever they were used to take out a nation or to do his will, if they were obedient and walking right, they didn't suffer. But when they weren't, they suffered calamities too. And this should also help us when we're looking at the common scriptures. You can see, why is there such a contrast when you go through? Sometimes not a man of them falls. They're all walking in obedience and they're untouchable. And then you see fighting amongst themselves, men dying on both sides. Even when Benjamin is doing evil and wickedness, the other side gets suffers again and again until what? Until there's no more wickedness amongst them, because they can't be hypocritical. You can't point out the splinter in your brother's eye when you have a plank in your own. So, but they didn't see that right away. Then these things weren't fully revealed until our Mashiach came. However, we can take the words that he said, look back at history, and see that it's absolutely true. That was what I was trying to show you there. So, verse 43. I read that one. Verse 44. It says, "They shall come to her," meaning Mystery Babylon, "and besiege her. They shall pour out the tempest and all its wrath upon her. Then shall the dust and smoke go up to the Shamayim, and all they that be about her shall bewail her," which is mentioned in Revelation 14:8 and 18:10 through 19. This is also the maiden daughter of Babel that's spoken of. I think it's in Yirmiyahu, and Mystery Babylon that's mentioned by Gad the seer, mentioned in Yeshayahu as well as Yirmiyahu. So there's a few places to talk about this and allude to what's going to happen. And it says, "And they that survive shall do service to them that have put them, or that have put her in fear." Now it talks about how Asia, which is Turkey, right, has become like Babylon. And if you're familiar with history, this should make sense. If not, then when Babylon fell to the Persians, the mystery religion or the pagan idolatry that was there transferred their seat of authority to Pergamos. They went over to Asia Minor. And it was in that area, in the midst of the 12 tribes of dispersion that were living there, that the seat of Satan was dwelling, which was mentioned in the epistles and in Revelation by Yahukanon. But it was the seat of Satan that they say was this false religious worship that was from Babylon. And when the king of Pergamos, or the sovereign of Pergamos, was dying, they had bequeathed their title and their reign to the Roman Caesars. But to claim it, they had to take on the title of Pontifex Maximus and claim to be divine or a deity, a mighty one, which is what eventually happened with Julius Caesar. And then Vespasian and the others also tried to reinstitute that after our Mashiach came, which is in those videos as well. But that is what they say. I can't say with absolute certainty that this is what's being spoken of, because that information about Pergamos and the seed of Satan being about that idolatrous worship does not come directly from the scriptures. That comes from the Alexander Hislop's The Two Babylons and the information that you can read from there. I can't say that all of that stuff is absolutely 100% correct, 100% correct. And there's good evidence to say that some of the things that people believe in this regard are wrong because it directly contradicts scripture. I'll just give you the one example that I have. And they say that Nimrod had illicit relations with his mother and that their child was an offspring of that who also married his mother slash grandmother, or it was something weird to that nature. But in scripture, it has the first incestuous relationship that was ever recorded and punished was with Lot and his daughters. It says that nothing like that had ever happened before. So to say that it happened before it happened is contrary to what's written. I don't know if that's in the two Babylons, but that's a common misconception that lots of people have, and it is what it is. I don't want to go beyond that. There's a lot of things that happen, especially in some of these other writings, where they just have stuff that disagrees with Scripture, and anytime it does that, you have to be careful, especially if it disagrees with multiple witnesses. But here we go. Now that you have a little bit of context, this should make more sense. It says, "And you, Asia, that are partakers of the glamour of Babylon." The glamour is the adornments, right? "And the splendor of her person. Woe be to you, miserable wretch, because you have made yourself like to her, and have decked your daughters in harlotry or whoredom, that they might please and esteem in your lovers, which have always lusted to commit harlotry or whoredom with you." And that again is Revelation 14 and 17, talking about Mystery Babylon. "You have imitated and followed her that is hated in all her works and inventions. Therefore, says Yahuwah, I will send plagues upon you, widowhood, poverty, famine, sword, and pestilence, to lay waste your houses with destruction and death." And if you look at the history of Turkey, what happened with Asia Minor, the fighting that went through, the plagues, the earthquakes, the destructions of Antioch, the tsunamis that wiped out the coast there, a lot of this stuff has happened. Just like he made Jerusalem a literal desolate desert for a long period of time, like he said he would. These things have happened because of what people have done. He says, "And the splendor of your power shall be dried up as a flower when the heat rises that is sent over you. You shall be weakened like a wretched woman beaten with stripes, and is wounded, so that you cannot receive your mighty lovers. Would I have dealt with you with a jealous wrath, says Yahuwah, if you had not always slain my chosen people, leaping for joy and clapping your hands, and talking about their dead when you were drunken, set forth the beauty of your countenance." Excuse me. "The reward of a harlot is in your bosom. Therefore you shall receive your recompense." And the reward of the harlot, being a harlot in the sight of our Maker, is exactly what's happened with Catholicism. And before that, it was the Nicolaitan usurpation of the believers, where they instituted the the pagan rites and forced them on the others by edict and government enforcement. Right? That was considered harlotry, and it was because of these very things that they were being punished and we are being punished, quite literally, for what was being done. It says, "Like as you have done to my chosen people, says Yahuwah, even so shall Yahuwah the Almighty do to you, and shall deliver you over to adversities. Your children shall die of hunger, and you shall fall by the sword, and your cities shall be broken down, and all your people who are in the open country shall perish with the sword. They that be in the mountains and highlands shall die of hunger, and they shall eat their own flesh in hunger for bread, and drink their own blood in thirst for water. And again, if you're familiar with the War of the Yahudim that was written by Yahusuf or Josephus, what happened to them in the land with the coming of Titus and Vespasian and the siege there, that's an allusion to what's happening after the rejection of the truth. It's a type and shadow. Unhappy above all others, you shall come through the sea and receive plagues again. And in this passage, and in the passage they shall wreck the hateful, unprofitable city, and shall destroy some portion of your land, and abolish a part of your esteem as they return from the devastated Babylon. And you shall be cast down by them like stubble, and they shall be like fire to you. And they shall consume you, and your cities, your land, and your mountains. They shall burn with fire all your woods and your fruitful trees. Your children shall then be carried away captive, and shall plunder all your wealth, and mar the beauty of your face. Basically, what Rome has been doing, taking from others with conquest and plunder, was going to be turned around. All right. The denunciation of Babylon, Asia, Mitzrayim or Egypt, and Syria, or what we call Armenia. The sorrows and the beginning of evils for Babylon. Now, Babylon is what we call Iraq. Asia is Turkey. These are the little things that happened during what was coming was Rome, and the fighting that would happen between all these people, the battles, the devastation. Those are the things that were alluded to in the smaller scale, and then the larger scale is what happens later on, right? It says, woe to you, Babylon and Asia. Woe to you, Mitzrayim and Syria. Gird up yourselves with sackcloth and haircloth. Bewail your children and lament for them, for your destruction is at hand. The sword has been sent upon you, and who is there to turn it back? A fire has been sent upon you, and who may quench it? Plagues have been sent upon you, and who is there that may drive them away? May any man drive away a hungry lion in the forest? Or may any man or any one quench the fire in stubble when it has begun to burn? May one turn again the arrow that is shot of a strong archer. Yahuwah Elohim sends the plagues and calamities, and who is there that can drive them away? A fire shall go forth from his wrath, and who is there to quench it? He shall cast lightnings, and who shall not be afraid? He shall thunder, and who shall not be terrified? Yahuwah shall threaten, and who shall not be utterly shattered at his presence? The Eretz and the foundations quakes. The sea arises up with waves from the deep, and the waves of it are troubled, and the fish also at the presence of Yahuwah, and before the splendor of his power. Psalms 18:15. For strong is his right hand that bends the bow, and his arrows that he shoots are sharp, and shall not miss when they begin to be shot into the ends of the world. That's also an allusion to what's in, I believe it's Chokmah Shalomo, the Wisdom of Solomon, chapter 3. At the end of it, where it talks about when our Mashiach comes back, all creation's going to fight for him. Lightning strikes are going to go exactly where they're, everyone not missing a target. Rocks and hail flying from the skies, hitting everything exactly where he wants it to. It's going to be horrific. An awesome, like terrible awesome to behold that kind of thing. And a micro microcosm of that, which you don't really see in detail, but it mentions in the Antiquities of the Yahudim by Josephus, when the children were given their exodus through the Sea of Reeds, and he parted it and then had it come back together. When he crashes the waters together and he's destroying Pharaoh and his army and chariots, it mentions that there's not just the waters coming together, but there's lightnings and storm and hail, and he opened up a can of nature on them, you can say, and just to wipe them out that way. It was also with the water, but he had other things involved. It says, "Behold, the plagues and calamities are sent forth and shall not return until they come and cover the Eretz. The fire is kindled and shall not be put out until it consumes the foundations of the Eretz or earth. Like as an arrow which is shot of a mighty archer returns not backward, even so the plagues that shall be sent upon the Eretz shall not return again. Woe is me, woe is me. Who will deliver me in those yamim or days?" Now, again, that every time they mention these woes and how it plays out in Revelation, I'm always reminded of what's in the book of Gad the seer. He says it's the song of the Lamb, but he goes, "Woe unto me, woe unto me, woe unto me." And then he goes to explain what those woes are. He says, "My image has been diminished as the first woe." And that would have been with Sixtus the Third there, right? Culminating in the enforcement of those things and the perversion of the truth, the keeping of Mass, Sunday, the other, um, the other pagan idolatry and the perverted worship that was enforced on others by the edge of the sword through secular government, right? That was the first woe. And then it says the second one, it says, "My refuge has been lost." And that second woe was during the rise of Constantine, when he came to power and he liberated the world from paganism by establishing Apollyon worship, which was um, not necessarily a good thing, obviously, but that was when his refuge was lost. And then the last woe, I don't have the exact quote in my head, but it says, "My image has been diminished, my refuge has been lost. They have given me up to my spoilers, and I've been defiled by the touch of uncleanness until evening," is the last one. And then actually starts with the coming of the seventh trumpet, the third woe, would have began around the time of the Civil War. The right after we separate from the nation, right after we had become our own place, and the woman was given a place of refuge in the wilderness, then the Counter Reformation comes in. And it was actually in the Civil War, the bloodiest battle of it, over 22,000 slain, where they're singing the battle hymn of the Republic, and they're talking about the seventh trumpet blast being sounded at that time. And that was exactly what was foretold in Revelation about the beginning of the seventh trumpet blast. So it was literal fulfillment of it right then. And that last woe, excuse me, that was beginning there was the mixture, the loss of it, the the defilement and the touch being mixed with impurity until evening, which is what happened with America after the Counter Reformation got its hands on us. We lost 500,000 of our own people fighting against each other to try to, um, well, there was a variety of reasons, but the liberation of slaves was a primary concern, not only for Abraham Lincoln, but all the way back to the times of Samuel or John Quincy Adams. John Adams' son, the sixth president of the United States, he spent the majority of his time not as the president, but as the member of Congress after he was president, reading petitions to stop slavery. He fought it, fought it, fought it, and while it wasn't accomplished in his yom or his day, it eventually was, but because there's so much evil done for the people who were pretentiously talking about equality under the law and having dominion as equals with our maker, there was a price to be paid for the hypocrisy, which is what happened. But that hypocrisy and the price we paid also is the foothold that the enemies have been using. They kill off believers and they flood it with their own. And that's the overthrow of our country with the influx of Roman Catholics through all the major cities in the 1800s. It was a literal event that was discovered by Jacopo Leone, and he wrote about it in a book called The Jesuit Conspiracy, The Secret Plan of the Order, with a preface by the considerant and the translation. Anyways, it's the secret plan, the secret conspiracy of the Jesuits in 1814. They were reinstituted as an order, and this gentleman named Jacopo Leone decided he wanted to be a Jesuit. He went to go be an initiate, and in the course of he was a gentleman that wanted to be a servant to our maker. He didn't know about their origins, their nefarious purposes or anything. But while he was there as a neophyte, an initiate, he had overheard a secret plan from the leaders there, including the future Jesuit general, on what they were going to do to overthrow the Reformation and these popular governments that were coming about, and to take over the world like the Caesars of old, to dominate and rule the world through force for Rome. That plot was exposed there, and then Samuel B. Morse, the same gentleman that gave us the Morse code, his traveling through Europe. That book was written in the 1820s, I believe. He was traveling through Europe around those same times, and then by 1835 he published his own book, which is called A Conspiracy Against the Liberties of the United States of America. And he exposes this plot to overthrow our country by inflooding it with Roman Catholics to steal the vote, basically. The same thing that you see with these immigrants, the the scare tactics they use to divide and conquer now with these illegal immigrants crossing the border kind of thing. It's something they've already done. They mock us with the ignorance of these things and throw it in our face to use for their purposes. But Samuel B. Morse exposed it as well, and he wrote that book in 1835. Then in the 1880s, you had a gentleman named Charles Chiniquy who wrote a book called 50 Years in the Church of Rome. And he was a Catholic priest for 25 years before he became a Protestant. And he exposed these things after the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, which he talks about in his book as well. But he was actually living through that. He was a Catholic priest that took his entire congregation from Canada into America. And he was part of the infiltration of this country by Roman Catholics. It was done through a variety of means. Um, the Canadians came over peaceably. Some of the Irish Roman Catholics, because they didn't want to come over, there was manufactured potato famines and other calamities that were brought about to force them. So they didn't really have a choice in the matter. But these things were known and exposed, and it's only because well, they control education that we don't get taught these things anymore. However, the truth is returning, and a whole part of us waking up and repenting of these things is to learn what actually is. However, that's part of the third woe that you can see that plays out right here as well. So I think that might be a decent place to stop. We're on, yeah, we still have a few more chapters after this. So we'll stop for comments and questions here. And then for everyone that's listening, thank you so much for your time. You have a wonderful Shabbat, and Father or Abba willing, we will all be together next week. If you have any comments or questions, please feel free. Leave them in the comments for the YouTube video. You can send emails if you want. We don't claim to have everything perfect or to know all the answers for every question. But if you can see how these things are playing out in literal history and the connections, and you want to learn more, I'm we're happy to share what we know. So Shabbat Shalom, and you have a wonderful y'all.